You ever hear a story so unbelievable that you almost think it must be a lie? Well, what happened to me wasn't a lie. It wasn't a rumor. It wasn't a made-up tale. It was my life. And it started with a piece of land that had been in my family for generations. My grandfather bought it after World War II. It was raw, wild, untamed land, with thick woods, open meadows, and a little creek that snaked its way across the property. He didn't buy it for profit. He bought it for peace. He built a small cabin where he could breathe fresh air, hunt in the fall, and teach his children how to work with their hands. My father inherited that land after him, and when my father passed, it came to me. I wasn't rich, I wasn't powerful, but I had something more precious than gold, heritage. And I knew every corner of that land, where the deer bedded down at night, where the foxes crossed the creek, where the spring wildflowers came up every March. It wasn't just soil and trees. It was ours. For years, the property sat quiet, except for my visits and the sound of nature. But then, things began to change. Developers came sniffing around. They wanted to build homes. Lots of homes. Big, flashy neighborhoods with fences, manicured lawns, and HOA fees. One day, a man in a sharp suit showed up at my door with a smile too wide to trust. "Sir," he said, "we'd like to make you an offer for your land." A very generous offer. I shook my head. "Not for sale. This land is family." He chuckled like he'd heard that before. "Everyone's got a price." "Not me," I said. And I shut the door. But greed doesn't quit easy. Weeks later, bulldozers started clearing the edges of my land. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Surely, they had misread the survey lines. But then the foundations were poured. And soon, houses, one after another, like teeth in a jaw, biting into my soil. I tried to stop it. I went to the county office. I showed them the deed. I showed them maps dating back decades. But you know what I found? Paperwork. Endless paperwork. And somehow, mysteriously, the lines had been moved. My acres had been carved up on paper, shifted, and signed away without me ever knowing. The Homeowners Association, the HOA, claimed it was all legal. That their buyers had rights. But they hadn't lived one day on that land. They hadn't seen my father mend the fences with his bare hands. They hadn't watched my grandfather plant the oak tree that still stood by the creek. Yet there it was. 35 brand new houses, standing on my property. And every month, more families moved in, waving as if they belonged. They built playgrounds where my hunting stand used to be. They dug swimming pools where the wildflowers grew. It was like watching a piece of my soul being stolen, brick by brick. I was angry. I was broken. I felt powerless. And then, I remembered something. Years ago, after a terrible drought, my father and I had built a dam upstream to hold water from the creek. It wasn't big, just enough to create a pond for cattle and to keep the land green. But that dam still stood. And behind it was water. A lot of water. One night, I drove out to the property and stood by that dam. The moon was high, and the air was still. I stared at the homes, their windows glowing in the distance. I thought about what they'd taken, what they'd erased, and in that silence, an idea came. Not revenge. No, something deeper. A reminder, a message. I opened the dam. At first, it was a trickle. Then a roar. The creek swelled and surged, reclaiming its path. Water rushed down into the valley, flooding the freshly laid lawns, the driveways, the manicured perfection of the HOA world. Sprinklers were swallowed. Yards turned into marsh. The land remembered itself. I didn't laugh. I didn't cheer. I just stood there, watching as nature whispered the truth. You can't own everything. You can't paper over history. The HOA was furious. They threatened me with lawsuits. They called the sheriff. But when the county came to investigate, they found the same thing I already knew. The dam had been legal, built long before any of those homes. It was part of the land, part of the water rights. I hadn't broken a law. I'd simply reminded them of one. And the families, some of them left, unwilling to live with the flooding. Others stayed, bitter and angry. But slowly, over time, they began to realize the truth. They started asking me about the land, about its history. They brought their kids to see the oak tree, to learn about the creek, to hear the stories of my grandfather. One family even invited me over for dinner. We didn't know, the father said. We thought it was just property. We didn't realize it was a legacy. I nodded. It always was. In the end, I didn't win in money. I didn't win in courtrooms. But I won something greater: respect. The HOA never bothered me again. The county redrew the lines, restoring my name to the deeds. And the dam still stands, a quiet guardian of memory. When I walk that land now, I see children playing, neighbors talking, life happening. And I realize that maybe my grandfather would have smiled at that. Not the greed, not the stealing, but the fact that the land was still alive, still loved, still teaching lessons to anyone willing to listen. So what's the message in all this? It's simple. You can take the land from a man, but you can't take the soul out of the land. Heritage is stronger than paper. Roots run deeper than profit. And sometimes, when you stand your ground, even the flow of water itself will rise to defend you.